Okay. Hello. Today, I'm talking to someone you know, someone everyone has encountered at one time or another on the internet, as he gets everywhere somehow, and he's always there waiting for you, somewhere in a YouTube link or in your brain. And that's Thomas P. Sheridan, who is, I guess you could say, arguably Ireland's maybe best known shaman. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe everything I'm saying is wrong. I shouldn't say shaman, but I'll let you describe yourself before I ramble too much about it. What would you
I
say?
don't know. After the Iraq on tour, that'd be about it. I mean, I don't do shamanism or anything like that. My interest in the occult and magic is pretty much none sort of ecclesiastical or whatever you'd call like that, clergy or anything like that. I'm very much a standish off kind of person and that stuff. I'm not really particularly interested in shamanism. I am actually, but I don't practice it or anything like that. So I guess I'm just a guy who writes books, makes videos about, and talks on radio shows like this about things that interest me. That's basically what I am. These are my hobbies, and they're my lifelong interests. And the occult, psychology, mind control, social engineering. These things have always fascinated me all my life. So I'm just basically taking my hobby out there and promoting it.
Well, as far as someone who's everybody has heard of or knows of and thinks of Irish paganism, at least, I think, or the sort of Irish occult person. So shaman wasn't a good choice of words.
Definitely
It's got to
pagan.
be you.
Yeah.
I mean, you still appear all over the place. You're appearing. Your voice is broadcast at these trucker rallies, or I just remember anytime I would search for videos, like other unrelated videos. See, we're always. I mean, I know people. Your YouTube brings up related searches of things you've looked at before, but I believe you seem to you just get around. You're always there waiting for the topic that no one's ever heard of that sounds really interesting and a little bit crazy. But so you're wrong about calling you a shaman, but you do have a. So have you researched? Would you say you're a researcher of Irish paganism or anything like that?
Well, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I've got a lifelong interest in paganism and in terms of pagan revivalism in a kind of a proper Indo-European sense rather than the sort of like reconstructed Wicca, what the kind of what passes for neo-paganism, neo-Druidism in Ireland, which is actually nothing of the sort. It's more of a new age kind of version of Wicca. Now, in terms of what I'm interested in, it would be sort of like finding the comparative archetypes across specific European pagan, uh, faiths, spiritual traditions, and comparing them with things like Hinduism and so on. And from finding this comparative association, then developing what was probably the ancestral spirituality pre-Christian of our Irish ancestors. Well, probably most of our European ancestors. So therefore, it's almost like I devoted myself to the reconstruction of something that was lost, and we were given fragments of that. We've had fragments of that, and we've had Christians basically being the stewards of what was called, the Irish mythology. But within that, it's almost like a detective story. You have to dig in there and start to find what really meant a spiritual tradition to our pre-Christian ancestors. So I guess I'm like a kind of a pagan archetypal archaeologist. You could probably put it that way as well.
Right. And I know you're into magic. Do you practice magic or do you just talk about it?
Yeah. I've been practicing ritual ceremonial magic since I was about 11. And I'm fascinated by chaos magic. I'm fascinated by emerging systems of interaction regarding consciousness and the localized environment, and so things like memes fascinate me, and things like the use of language fascinates me. Things like the everything is basically magic. It's just all art and all creative processes are magic. It's just that it's when you can go beyond the the confines of the material expectations of it and achieve something truly spectacular that really people take notice. And I've done that several times in my life.
Can I ask what are the most notable examples of that? Just since you brought
Just about anything I've ever wanted, I've got it. I mean, when I lost my career as an artist in 2008 because of the downturn in the economic system in Ireland, I put it to me that I was going to become world famous as an author, and by kind of like a system of process. And I'm not going to tell you what it was, but it was essentially a form of extreme sort of what's the word? It's sort of like annihilation gnosis, is the way I would describe it.
Okay.
A method of bringing myself close to death and pouring that energy into this process that I actually had a best-selling book, and it gave me a career as a writer and got me well known for lots of things around the world. So I mean, it's all my life I've done things like that. I'm very aware of the use of language. I've been very attuned how to talk to people and how to address myself. I come from a very impoverished background, a ghetto on the north side of Dublin that no longer exists called Ballymun, and this is like a really bad area. And
I heard about it.
yeah, by the time I was in my early 30s, I was working as a manager on Wall Street in Goldman Sachs, and that was with no background in the financial industry. That was purely just as a method of using language and getting myself in the communications department and the graphic department, and actually teaching and actually using a kind of a bamboozle. And I wouldn't say no, it's not. This is not the same thing as like being a kind of like a jack the lad talking shite and stuff like this. It was an actual specific use of language that I'd learned at an early age that actually created a path for me that won me the respect of people who were like vastly more that went to Ivy League colleges in the United States, because there's a directness of language that's actually missing within the Western vernacular, particularly today. And by correct usage of language, particularly in terms of talking in terms of things that have already happened, you can actually alter the fabric of reality. It's very easy. It's very simple. It just requires a level of concentration that gets you out of the concept that you're actually doomed to the words you speak. For therefore, in terms of thinking of a concept or talking about something, don't talk in terms of like, I want this, I should have this, I would like to have this, I wish for this. You project yourself into a future position where you already have achieved these aims and objectives, and you're talking about them in the past sense. And then the quantum world does its thing, and before you know it, you're actually in that reality.
Now that is fascinating. Okay, so I didn't know that. And is that an art you feel you could teach someone, or is that like a natural ability?
Well, it came out of like the chaos magic scene. I mean, I paid a lot of attention to particular people like Phil Hine, and even the works of Robert Anton Wilson. And there was well, but even went further back than that. From an early age, I read an article in I think it was Omni magazine, and it was about how H.P. Lovecraft, through his writing, had basically generated a reality ahead of him, kind of created a kind of an American shamanism, and by the use of almost predictive language. And then it went on to a whole thing about how science fiction people had actually predicted the future. And I'd come to the conclusion, along with this writer already, that they didn't actually predict the future. They had somehow created it by throwing themselves into it. And then when I discovered the work later on of people like Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard, and so on, that's actually what was happening. That the language, the actual use of syntax in terms of projecting one's fate into the future basically rewrites the past behind it. And then you catch up with a future that you wished for, that you willed for, and it turns into reality. And it's remarkably easy. Everyone can do this. Everyone's capable of this. But the reality is that it takes an element of concentration that's very difficult, due mainly to our education system, which tells us that certain things are not possible. And they absolutely are. I have no special gifts. I just, I'm doing what many other people have done in life. And you'll find that many people who've been very successful in business and everything else, they'll often tell you that they imagined themselves in that position.
I've heard this, yeah.
Yeah, and that's literally what's happening. It's just turning that into a kind of a process.
Willing it into existence. So, I mean, that's fascinating. It's
well, you're already.
Sorry, go ahead.
Remember Joseph Campbell, the American mythologist. He in one of his books, he spoke about he was actually a middle distance runner in college before he actually became a mythologist, an academic. And he said that there was actually races that he saw himself at passing the finish line before anyone else, and in every single race that happened.
And so, did you have a standard sort of Catholic upbringing? Can I ask?
Well, I went through the regular Catholic thing, but my parents were not religious, so I was not subject to any kind of holy roller thing. You don't have that in urban Ireland to the same degree, especially in like a very poor area. You don't have to the same degree that you would have in, say, rural Ireland. So thankfully, I avoided all that nonsense. I was actually extremely blasphemous from an early age. I can remember that actually being a very important part of my development growing up. And that was not, and that wasn't, I look back at that now and I say, well, that wasn't a viciousness or a nastiness. It was just a need to transcend the curtails that were placed upon me by a Catholic Irish society at that time, which I found, which was extremely oppressive. If you were not one of those, if you were not in the faith, so to say. And again, it was very liberating when I realized, there was no such thing as the devil and so on like that, although there is such things as evil, of course, and that thing. But the theological underpinnings of the moral imperative diminished rather quickly. And I knew from an early age that Catholic priests, for many of them, were, having sexual relationships with their housekeepers and fostering children. And there were probably going to be major scandals within my lifetime, particularly regarding bishops, which happened. And so it was almost like, again, I was sort of like not seeing the future, but kind of anticipating in a kind of almost like a gambler or something, I guess. But I haven't said that. I actually had quite good relations with Catholic priests. I can remember, like, when we moved out to Tala, I became quite friendly with a Catholic priest. And this man was like a genuine, the kind of Catholic priest that does deserve an accolade. He worked with prostitutes in Philadelphia for years and things like that. Then came back to Ireland to work with drug addicts. And I developed a tremendous respect and rapport with this man. He never, ever once, when he asked me about my own spiritual beliefs, I said, well, I don't actually believe in your God and stuff like that. And he was very cordial and gracious about it. So at the same time, too, I was with one, I guess the hierarchy and structural power of the Catholic Church was an abomination to me. But then on the street, I would meet priests and nuns who are actually really decent human beings.
So you're anti-hierarchical in that sense. So that's why you shun any official religious.
Yeah, I guess so. The thing is, I'm kind of an anarchist in many ways. I don't believe in big government. I don't believe in big institutions. I think that human beings by nature are basically tribal, and should really exist in localized small tribal structures. Of course, the internet gives us the ability now to actually transproject beyond, the limitations of our like a localized environment. But at the same time, too, I do honestly believe that any large institution that gets over a certain size, and don't ask me what that size is, that corruption becomes inherent within it. We see that in politics, and we see that within big religions. I mean, I was reading recently about like smaller American religions like the Shakers and so on, and finding them remarkably interesting and hence in the way that they've avoided corruption and things like that. And it's probably due to the fact that they're small and they're not particularly powerful. So I think power does attract pathological and psychopathic individuals, and that even includes religion.
Yeah, but I do think you need, like, for any kind of structure, you need some minor hierarchy at least of, like, I mean, I could be wrong if there's an anarchist way to organize you don't care about organizing. You have your followers though, and they listen to you, and they think of you. I'm not saying they think of you as a cult leader, but you do have a certain authority there, even though it's just online.
Like, I don't have a book of rules. I don't have I don't say to people, look, here's my book of rules, follow it. I just say to them, look, this is my attitude. Yeah, okay, is it a cult leader thing? It probably is, in a sense that it's a popular cult kind of phenomena in that sense. But in terms of like what you would call someone who was a leader of an organization, I had nobody rules and regulations. I say that you have to do this. I tell people, look, this is what's worked for me in my life. If it works for you, go for it. Good for you. And that's the end of it. And my attitude is always generally free will. I have a tendency to drive away people who have a tendency to move from one cult to the next. I don't have much time for individuals who might be a Scientologist one year, a Jehovah's Witness the next year, a UFO cult or a Christian the next year. I find these people incredibly tiresome. And these are people that are generally, and that's one of the reasons I developed this attitude. Look, I don't have any answers. I don't have any rules. And I don't really care about you. I mean, that's my attitude to these people. I don't care about you. I care about myself and the people I love in my own life. And if you're a nice person, I'm a nice person, or a decent human being, good, we'll have a nice time and meet. But in terms of me actually ministering to you in terms of your life and your life story, I couldn't give a shit. You're off on your own, and that's the end of it. And that to me is like that to me is the anarchist way. You know, it's like
Yeah.
leave me alone, I'll leave you alone, and let's just meet as compatible people.
True. So can I ask this way you have of talking, and it's the same when you do your monologue videos, and this is the, as you say, the whole, I was going to say trick that you learned or whatever you call it, the magic, your way of memeing magic, the way via the way you speak, is you speak very forthright, you speak very extremely honestly, sort of confidently. Like, is that the same way you would have spoken with the Wall Street Gang? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Would you have dropped truth bombs like that, just bam, 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 and
yeah, well,
they would love it?
Well, I can remember like I was very good at I've always been very good at reacting to things. Like I can remember like there was once a Wall Street company, and somebody made a joke about the Irish famine happened because the Irish didn't know how to rotate their crops. And he said as a joke, he didn't hurtful or anything like that. And I could react to that in a kind of way that the snowflakes and the SJWs of today react by being offended. And I actually played along. And says, you're probably right. And I discovered they all burst out laughing. And of course, everyone knew it was absurd and wasn't true. But at the you realize there's a certain power in that. A certain element of winning people's respect, because you're not. I mean, I think being offended and being upset by things is a kind of a form of black magic where people hex themselves. And you see that with whole.
Where they hex themselves? Is that what you said? Hex themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you develop a victim complex, you're basically spiraling out of your own charisma and into a very dark abyss. And
That's true,
that. You see that with groups, ethnic groups that have like a sense of fatalism, or we were oppressed in the past, and we'll never we have to fight this oppression forever. It's extremely dangerous, whether that's in an individual, in a family, in a social circus. I've actually seen it in companies, where there's been a failure in the company, and it sets in like a cancer, this kind of death spiral into the abyss. And that's why ultimately you develop charisma as by putting the brakes on those what's the word?
Self-pity. That's self-pity stuff.
Downward trajectories. Yeah.
No, that's that is all also extremely true and interesting. Yes, you've definitely you're a good student of the human psyche in general, I guess, and that's part of what you examined, I guess, growing up. Did you were your parents, when you were dabbling in the occult, were your parents sort of horrified, or were they okay? Or
my parents what?
When you were sort of interested in the occult and so forth, what do they?
I was kind of like I don't know. I mean, they didn't really particularly know about that. There was books lying all around my bedroom and stuff. They probably would have just thought I was just reading stuff. I was kind of like part of youth cultures. I was a punk for a while, then I kind of got into the kind of metal thing, and then the kind of goth thing after that. So that would have been seen as like part. They would have just seen that as part of another phase he's going through or something, like all teenagers. I mean, like I think a lot of parents, if they saw their copy of Simon's Necronomicon in their teenage daughter's bedroom, would actually find it kind of charming, rather than being alert by being what's the word, horrified by it. It's assuming they're not the fundamentalist Christians or something like that.
Right. So you were in the metal scene as well. So that's, I mean, we know some mutual people, and I think they're pretty much all metalheads, which is, I love it. It's great. There's a great ongoing metal scene here in Ireland that I almost like. There's other places that are like that, but it's being a metal person never goes away, I don't think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, from I remember at a very young age, I think it was 13, I saw Judas Priest opening with Thin Lizzy at Dailyman Park, and ever since that point on, now I do like lots of other music, to be honest with you, but I always do return to metal, and I'm actually kind of like I'm kind of very particular about the kind of metal I like. I'm not a huge fan. I mean, I do like things like Burzum and stuff like that, but I'm not a huge fan of like the particular death metal genre as it's kind of become pedestrianized. I mean, when Venom and all that stuff first came out, it was great, Slayer and Burzum, and there was a band before Euronymous, the band before the Norwegian. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
but that stuff was fabulous. But at the same time, too, I was actually a lot of metalheads too. Like I speak to like the same music. Like I was talking to Steve Hughes, and he was like, he's into Susie and the Banshees and bands like that too as well. So there was a huge crossover between those kinds of bands and the other stuff like Bauhaus, Sisters of Mercy, particularly Fields of the Nephilim. So that they're also the cult, and the original Southern Death Cult before them. I think like I was actually, if you want to make a perfect band, my idea, I have thought if anyone could ever fuse the sort of like light and shade guitar playing and sound of Judas Priest with Sin After Sin, Judas Priest, The Leech in the East, with sort of like the musicianship, the sort of awkward musicianship of like Susie and the Banshees, you'd have an absolutely perfect band. I don't think feel sort of came close. And but that's about the only one that. But it's still there for the taking, as far as I'm concerned.
No, it's a great idea. I mean, that's how you make a new type of music, a new genre, is by finding two things that don't necessarily seem matched that are both excellent and combining them. I mean, that's how, like Judas Priest and the early classic metalers were kind of taking, the hard rock of the time. Plus, I don't know what's their other influence. I know, like you could say, thrash metal was like classic metal plus punk rock.
Taking the blues element out of it. As metal progressed, you was like when the new wave of British heavy metal came along, and you had the first Iron Maiden albums and stuff like that, and bands like Angel Witch, and they were less and less blues sounding, and they were incorporating more of the punk rock thing.
Or like and medieval, and even like
later on, definitely classical big time. Well, I mean, classical music in many ways is the daddy of metal.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, and metal people are much more open to things like paganism, I find, anyways. Just naturally that kind of person.
Yeah, especially it's like I have a lot of people in the US military who follow me, and they're all pagans and they're all like metalheads as well. So it's like, it's interesting.
So you had great success with this book. Was that the first before you started YouTubing and all that?
It was around, I started YouTubing in 2010, and I started telling my experiences meeting these pathological. I'll tell you what happened. I was working on Wall Street basically, and I started to see how pretty evil the money system was. And even though I wasn't a money man, certain events and certain individuals there bothered me. At the same time, I took an interest in serial killers. I was very fascinated by serial killers, and I was reading books on serial killers. And it dawned on me that half my fucking managers were fit the same profile.
Psychopaths.
But they're socialized psychopaths. So I started taking an interest, and there wasn't much. There was, before that, there wasn't Herbie Cleckley's book, and a few other things. But it wasn't until Dr. Robert Hare came out with Without Conscience, and I said, that's them. That's exactly them. Because he had the first to do an actual clinical study of them properly. And so I started making videos about them, and a publisher in England contacted me and says, Jesus, you're very interesting. Would you ever think of writing a book about that, like a survival manual, and how to deal with these people in the workplace? I wrote a book called Puzzling People, The Labyrinth of the Psychopath, and it gave me a name. I mean, they did all right. I mean, considering I was on a small publisher and I had no really promoting or anything, and I'm still getting paid by the publisher this day from it. That's like over a decade. So it's made me a few quid and stuff like that, and nothing spectacular. That's what publishing is. But it's nice to know the book has a tremendous longevity. Then that opened the door for me to write books on paganism, mythology, ancient sites, and all the other things, Portian stuff, and all the other things that listen. Because once I had the name out there, it was like, well, here I go. I can talk and write about anything. The stuff I'm really into now at this point.
Yeah, I think everybody who's interested in any kind of psychology and even broadly cultural things should, and generally does, at some point take an interest in the serial killer phenomenon when you realize that you're dealing with a whole different type of like human or animal or whatever the way of viewing the world is fundamentally different and kind of fucked. And then that leads you to those kind of types of conclusions that there's many other people like this that aren't killing people.
I think the huge influence of me was the book The Ultimate Evil, I think it was called, by Maury Terry, and then there was another one that was written by David Yallop about the Yorkshire Ripper case, and especially the David Yallop one about his, because he was embedded with the South and West Yorkshire police at the time the actual killings were happening, and it was just absolutely riveting reading to see how he was actually profiling this guy Sutcliffe before he was caught, and it made me realize they're sort of like these predatory. Well, that's what Robert Hare called them, interpredatory interspecies predators. Absolutely, that's what they are.
Yeah. But like I'm sure you do, and I have known, like you knew the Wall Street people. I know people in my family that I believe are, a little bit. They're not necessarily full blown sociopath, psychopath, but say there's definitely. I think there's a sub diagnosis, which is extreme narcissism, which is kind of similar in that they're so selfish.
I call them proto-psychopaths. They're not full
Okay.
on Ted Bundy or
Yeah.
but they're not full on, Tony Blair, but they've just and they've got that element within them. Whatever
Yeah.
way it was, I thought when I grew up in Ballymun, I saw that a lot in kids because there was a lot of problems there. Alcoholism in families and
Yeah.
drug abuse and general. You'd see kids that grew up from an abusive home. They would grow up with like this coldness in their eyes. Now they could actually be cured, those people, but it was almost like a survival instinct in them. Something happens. I was reading an article, a very good, I think it was in the New England Journal of Medicine. One of the new theories about borderline personality is that it's really fascinating stuff. Is that borderline personalities, it's usually generally women, sometimes very rarely men, but they share a lot of the same traits as psychopaths and so on. And the manipulative, conniving, user discarding kind of thing, and destroying people, the smear campaigns, and this study had some very interesting stuff in it that basically they had found. Probably, I mean, who knows if it's true or not? Because I've read so many medical journals on this stuff. But it's interesting anyway. That at some point, as a baby, as an infant, this baby observed their mother in a high tension state. So, say she was in a supermarket, right, holding the baby, and somebody did something to her, and she went, "You fucking asshole," or something like that, and the baby, the young infant, witnesses this directly face on. It goes into a very primal fight or flight mode, and it basically shuts down its cerebral cortex at the front, the prefrontal cerebral cortex, and puts it into a position where it has two primary factors in life. It's that the need to survive at any cost, and it becomes innate in their personality, and also a terror of being abandoned because they think that their mother has abandoned them at that moment. The mother is screaming. They don't have the awareness, the social awareness, to know the mother is screaming at someone else because the mother is the center of the child's universe. And I found that tremendously interesting when I was reading that up. So there's all kinds of theories out there on the stuff, and it's definitely not a brain disorder. I've not seen one single medical thing that actually can point to a brain disorder.
Oh, so you think they're all created? Okay, I didn't. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, no, I don't think they're all created. I think some of them. I think it's in consciousness. We all know that consciousness is non-local to the body and it's not in the brain. And if there's some individuals that are predatory consciousness, and just because the cerebral cortex is shut off in certain, or their brainstem floods with norepinephrine and gives them those famous psycho eyes and stuff like that because it inflames around the optical cortex, doesn't actually mean that's all in the brain. It's not. There's a predatory consciousness underneath it. We are not inside our brains. There isn't a neurosurgeon on this planet, past, present, and possibly future, that can actually point to where you are inside your own skull. You're not in there. You're simply not. This is just, we're somewhere else.
Right. Well,
anyone who's psychedelics or anything can tell you that, can vouch for that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I believe also a lot of people are extremely imprintable. I'm not sure what they are. They're not quite psychopaths, but they're so little to them at a deeper level, or maybe it's hidden. I'm not sure, but they're so easily suggestible. Like even I believe because the corporate world has become so led by psychopaths, I believe that maybe this is said in one of those books you were mentioning. I haven't read any of them actually, but that it creates a culture of creating more psychopaths because everyone has to sort of imitate that kind of behavior. When the boss drops, when the new buzzword drops in the office, and everyone has to start using it, the one who does it the most quickly and soullessly, and without any doubt, without any sort of sign of humanity, has a better chance of going up the ladder. I think so. It kind of creates psychopaths from normal people, and I just think, not just in that sense, but in the sense of like the normal person, incredibly suggestible, and like a great deal of them aren't even really there in a way. It's my weird theory. I'm not sure how to.
No, I completely agree. It's called, absolutely, there's no doubt about that. We're talking about things like NPC archetype, the non-played
Yeah,
role, the
yeah.
non-played character person, the vacuous person. There's nothing in there that. Oh, absolutely, I agree with that. I mean, I
But
was
most of them
talking.
are that. That's most people. That's got to be like at least
I'd
half
say,
more.
I'd say it's more than half. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd say it's more than half. The rest are sort of like semi. You hear people talk about there's people that are along the autistic spectrum. There's people who are also along the sentient spectrum as well, and they go from being unsentient to fairly and pretty well sentient. Absolutely, I think and it also seems to be a regional thing as well. I think you go to certain cultures and you meet more NPC type people than you will in others. I spent a lot of time in Scandinavia. There's definitely that lack of personality depth to many people there, and it's
Really.
definitely spread out by the culture and things like that. But also there's an over reliance on things like psychotropic medications like Ritalin and Prozac and Xanax and all these other things. And I think in Ireland, that's when I spoke to a few years ago to an Indian Swami, and his theory was, and I think it's a very good one, is that there's actually more souls, there's actually more bodies on this planet than there are souls to occupy them. And so the rest are sort of like what the Jews call the golem, kind of like a soulless person that doesn't really exist. It doesn't really exist beyond the need to exist. And they're just there in reality for us. So, I mean, you can walk down the street and you're assuming to yourself, we all do it, that this guy coming towards me, this person coming towards me, his worldview or his sense of reality is similar to mine. Oh, it's the biggest mistake we could ever make. Most of them are barely alive. They're barely alive.
Yeah. And just returning, so like, yeah, and then, so they'll do whatever they're told, and there's not much you can do about it, I don't think. But I just wanted to return. I was just thinking again about in terms of paganism, and before I lose the thought, I wanted to ask you before is how do you, if you, so you believe, I believe you believe that everybody should practice their ethnic historic religion as much closely as you don't like the word religion, but faith or whatever, spirituality. So
Yeah,
as in the Irish should worship the Irish gods, etc. So maybe tell us about that, and also like how in terms of the Irish myths, we have like there's a lot, and they're very varied and they conflict. And of all the older religions, even the Norse has more kind of literature. I think I could be wrong. Maybe I'm totally
Oh
wrong
no,
on this.
Ireland has a tremendous amount, but it's just that it's. Can I ask you a question? Are you a religious person?
Yeah, I still yes, I'm really a Platonist, Neoplatonist. I do call myself that. And
Neo-pagan.
yeah, and I I was raised Catholic, not super strictly, but I can't completely deny it in myself. And I think all of us, we're living in a Christian society. It's in our moral. We can't be 100% the way we were in our outlook. We just can't. I don't think. When I read the old texts of the way people speak and behave, we're not quite that anymore. And so I believe it's like dishonest to completely renounce and say, okay, we're no longer Christian at all. I think it's in us almost genetically to a certain degree. So I just can't say I'm totally out of it, and I can't 100% deny it.
Yeah, that's
And
quite. I mean,
yeah,
a lot of people just like you. I mean, a lot, especially in Ireland. Let me put it this way. Let me tell you why I'm anti-Christian. And when I say anti-Christian, I don't mean I hate people who are Christians or anything like that. I'm just talking about
yeah,
in terms of spiritual tradition. The majority, like we have to remember, we have to think in terms of where Christianity came from. It was a breakaway sect of Judaism that happened about 1900 years ago, based on this probable fictional, but who knows, character called Jesus Christ. Now, it was definitely wasn't the new religion. It was just trying to reform Judaism, and it was a Second Temple rabbinical uh, church, or
yeah,
whatever you want to call it. And it found itself extremely marginalized inside the Roman Empire, not just by Christians, not just by Roman pagans, but also by Jews as well. So they developed a hostility both towards Orthodox Jews in the Middle East and within the Roman Empire as a whole, and also to the pagan structures. Now they were they begged for tolerance. They begged for tolerance, and they said, "We are a minority religion. The Roman Empire seems to be quite good at respecting minority religions. You don't like Christianity, blah blah blah." And a lot of it has to do with the fact that Jews were also lobbying Roman governors and stuff like that to say, "Watch these guys, they're crazy," and a lot of that kind of thing was going on.
yeah,
So eventually, the tolerance was given, and like anything else, like they moved into positions of power in the Roman Empire, and the tolerance that they demanded from the Roman Empire, they absolutely took away from everyone else. And literally as immediately as they assumed power, they started burning down pagan temples, attacking Jewish synagogues. The Temple of Palmyra, you all know the story of Hypatia and the Emperor Alexander. It goes on and on and on.
Killing the Hierophants. Yeah.
You had the point where Constantine the Great, who was born and died a pagan, by the way, he
was Sol Invictus.
Yep. And I mean, his monument, the Constantine Arch, shows him doing a sacrifice at the Temple of Jupiter in Rome. So he died. That's how he died. And he recognized he saw a kind of a powerful way of uniting the army under one god. This concept, he thought it was very, very powerful. Where you had cults like Mithraism being central to the Roman legions and the Roman military structure, he absorbed that with Christianity. And then from that on, the Mithraism, that's why we have like Jesus having the same birth date as Mithra and so on. They it over a period of time. Now that's Christianity was a breakaway sect. It was like the Taliban, and it'd be like the Taliban, the US government saying, rather than fighting the Taliban, why don't we make them part of the army? And that's how that's why you and I became a Catholic, right? And a person became a Protestant. That's there's no other reason. It's purely an administrative system of conquest from day one by this sign conquer. And it's gone on for the last, 1800 years.
Yeah.
At the same time, Christians have been very clever. They've co-opted local archetypes and you see, I was talking to someone the other day, and he said, "Oh, the Catholic Church is satanic." Because go on, tell me about it. And he goes, "It took away the true Christianity of love and stuff." And I said, "Well, you obviously know nothing about early Christianity. It was the Taliban on steroids." And I said, if anything, the Catholicism was the religion that legitimized Christianity, and how it did that was because it basically gave it paganism. It gave it its holidays, its basically its rites and everything. I mean, the Latin Mass, that the Catholic Mass goes right back to the ceremonies in the Temple of Jupiter and stuff like that in Rome. And that's why you have all the Christian holidays are all pagan holidays and the days of the week and so on. And this happened. This continued on until it went into Northern Europe. I actually believe that if you look at this, there's absolutely no imagery of Jesus Christ on the cross, probably up until about 1000 AD. And then suddenly it starts appearing. There was a cockerel, a pair of keys, a sheep, a lamb, and commonly a fish. No crucifix. The crucifix appears about 1000 AD in mass use, just as they were moving into Northern Europe. And basically it's Wotan, it's Odin. They were basically then co-opting the Nordic pagan religions and bringing it in. That's why the throne of St. Peter is inverted, because that's Wotan hanging from the Yggdrasil tree. So they've been incredibly clever, unbelievably clever. And that's the only reason you're a Christian, because of a political need to control. Nothing else.
I didn't mean to say that I am Christian. I just be trying to be honest with myself and my upbringing and background, more morally speaking. I do I pray to see if this is my other guilty thing in terms of what you say, how we should pray to our ethnic gods, is that I tend to pray to Hellenic gods, just again following sort of my own instinct, whatever resonates with me, and because I'm so into ever since reading the classics and thinking about studying about it. Anyway, that's
whatever resonates to you. I mean, I venerate Hindu gods. I find a tremendous help in Hinduism as well. I mean, if it wasn't an Indo-European pagan, I'd almost certainly be a Hindu. I know that for a fact. And so, I mean, again, when I said you are a Christian, I meant in general, not mean you personally.
Oh, right. Okay.
But absolutely. So, I mean, people go through life assuming, oh, I'm a Catholic. Why are you Catholic? Oh, I'm a Protestant. Why are you Protestant? Well, my parents were. And why are you parents? They never think to actually how they arrive at this point that I'm worshipping a dead guy hanging on a piece of stick in the Middle East.
And they defend it angrily, they're angry about it.
Yeah, because I mean, because I'll tell you, it's been an incredible psyop. I mean, the Abrahamic thing of one God. I mean, I think it was Gore Vidal in his book, the Rise and Fall of the American Empire, the Decline and Fall of the American Empire. he said that the greatest catastrophe that ever befell Western civilization was monotheism, because once you have one God, you have one king, one ruler, one emperor, one law, and it absolutely demolishes any kind of genuine, real diversity, and replaces that with like enforced diversity of, yeah, you can all be diverse as long as you're diverse under what we say you can be diverse under.
Yeah, Gore Vidal. I forgot about him. I read a couple of his books. They were really good. I always admired him. Yeah, forgot about him.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
also wrote Ben-Hur.
He
And I
wrote
think
which?
Ben-Hur, the movie, Ben-Hur, he
He
wrote the
did?
script.
I didn't know that.
I also think he wrote Spartacus as well. Yeah, you check me on
Did he?
that. He definitely wrote Ben-Hur. He definitely
He was
did.
a fan of the classics. He wrote one book, and I read it, and it was so long ago I can't remember it now. But something to do with speculating about how Socrates and Buddha and like various other who else was in it? Various famous characters from around the world, not necessarily religious, but that they were almost living in the same, like that, and an really old one could meet up with a very young Zarathustra or whatever. I don't remember. And it's all these famous characters were somehow giving their story, and even I can't remember if they were traveling and meeting each other. But it was a great little book, anyways. But he was definitely I saw him. I don't think he called himself a pagan. Maybe I'm wrong, but he would definitely defend the classics like antiquity against Christians.
Yeah.
I saw often
He called
whenever there was one.
himself a pagan with a small p.
Did he? Okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. That like I forgot the Mithras is another one that's always really fascinated me. I keep thinking I'm pretty good at sculpting. I'm thinking I'm going to make a little Mithras out of clay here, sometime pretty soon. And that's like there's a lot of stuff from that. The Christian, like there was also they had a wine ritual. I think that sort of Christianity or maybe took that from Mithraism. I'm not sure.
It was actually cow's blood, the original one. The
Was
original
it? Yeah.
blood, yeah. I mean, it was actually you were sacrificed of bull's blood. Actually, that's quite common. Is the bovine cults and the bull cults.
And is that what they put the Anita Muscara in? Didn't they put that in the mushroom?
No, bull's blood is actually hallucinogenic.
Is it?
You can ingest it. Well, it will cause kind of intense dreaming process. I mean,
Right.
I was reading Colin Wilson in one of his books.
Another great. You're dropping all the amazing classic authors.
He spoke about the hallucinogen. Well, the sort of like active dreaming. That'd be a better word to use. Active dreaming rather than hallucinogenics, and it was quite common in many sort of like pagan societies for lawmakers to decide upon things by drinking the blood of a freshly slain oxen and sleeping and then waking up with the answer. So it's kind of hallucinogenic, like freshly slaughtered bulls and oxen blood. Yeah,
isn't that the Kings of Atlantis did something like that too? Didn't they? Am I wrong? I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's all. I mean, I like I said. So I only just think because I know it. I agree with how it took over and everything else. And part of the real power in it though is the duality of the heaven hell thing. I think especially for a true like evangelical believer, the threat of hell is quite terrifying. Obviously, that's something paganism doesn't have the strength of that threat. Let's say in terms of influencing the average mind, the imprintable mind. So that is their great strength, I think, was that, as well as the other thing you said. They're ruthless, but that makes them more ruthless, right? Because they need everyone else to believe because they're terrified, I guess.
Well, you see, you look at even the way things, the last 2 years under the lockdown, people were absolutely putting that. What was hell was replaced with dying of COVID. They replaced going to hell with dying of COVID. You see, it's a phenomenal template, and the sanctification of the vaccine was the kind of like the transubstantiation to actually absolve you and bring you everlasting life. See, the Christian playbook, template, boilerplate framework has been a phenomenal system that's completely adaptable to create everything from cults from Jonestown all the way to terrified of a virus that kills almost nobody under the age of 83. And in order to get people to do what you want. And especially here in Ireland, where people had lost their religion, the COVID method and the COVID narrative here had given them back their old gods, the rituals, the bathing, the blessing, the fears, the kind of like, the Angelus and stuff like that had become a kind of a new religion for the people. Yeah. And they played on very, very well. Very, very well.
Yeah. But You mentioned something earlier before about how you did touch on how in Catholicism there is at least a trace of the Roman ritual, and that is what another thing I do must say I like. I try not to be too hard on the Christians myself, just because, like I said, I feel like they're with us genealogically and in the present, and I'd like to find a way to bring these things together a little bit. I know it's very hard, and you would probably say it's impossible, but I like to. It's my little fancy thing. My fanciful notion, let's say. But like I go on occasion, or I have gone to there's a Latin mass on in town there,
Right.
and it's pretty good, and it's very Roman. Like it's very, when it's all in Latin, it's obviously very extremely Roman, and it's only at the little halfway point when they give a sermon in English and they start carrying on about Israel or whatever, and then it's all ruined for 20 minutes. But the rest is just singing and the chanting and the incense, and it's great. And it really is very much. If you read what's his not Homer, what's his name? Oh, what's the poet, the great Roman poet?
Seneca.
Begins with an H. Horace. Horace has great descriptions of a Roman sort of mass to Jupiter, and it just sounds very similar, extremely similar.
Yeah.
So I like that.
Yeah, that's where it comes from.
Yeah.
I mean, if you ever been through a Jewish religious ceremony, it's very different, and you see like just how. I mean, how if you go to a synagogue, and I've gone to a few funerals and stuff like that of Jewish people I've known, and the rituals and the rites are so fantastic, incredibly different than what you would get in Catholicism. That you realize then that basically what the Catholic Mass is absolutely it's the pagan Mass, just with the name Jesus inserted into it, basically.
Yeah, and that's the only lame part, I guess. The it's good otherwise. But so originally I was going to ask you in terms of worshiping an Irish, a folkloric Irish spirituality. Like, where did you get the sources to piece together? And have you written a book specifically about this?
Well, I kind of touched on a little bit, a book called the Druid Code, but that was basically my experiences in discovering this stuff by traveling around megalithic sites. Not just in Ireland, but around Europe. You know what you look like there at the hood in your head? Yeah, the Mask of the Red Death, the Roger Corman movie. Oh, you need a set of cards. Yeah, that's what you remind me of. Today I traveled to Verona and so on.
I was going to get a kind of gold mask like Clytus from Flash Gordon, but I thought maybe that's a bit much.
Yeah, that'd been pretty cool. No, I like the Mask of the Red Death thing. It's better. But what was I going to say? I'm piecing it together. Well, I was kind of naive for years because I took it at face value, and then I realized that the whole thing was written down by Christian monks. So it was highly editorialized. It's pretty obvious when you start hearing things like, that, Noah's granddaughter was the first person in Ireland and all this nonsense and so on, the Parthenon and all this crap. But that's what I was at the beginning of the program. I said, like, what I did was I got into the whole concept of, well, okay, let's find the truth. What's comparable? Well, lots of things are comparable across the Indo-European archetypal spectrum, okay?
Right.
So, for instance, let's go ravens and corvids. It's there, that kind of a thing, like the Valkyries, the Morrigan, the Babe, the Duvavati in Hinduism. Bang, we have something. A thunder god, Urko, Thor, Indra, bringing it back to the Vedic thing again. So then I started to realize that, well, there are ones that we know, even if the Christians messed them up, Snorenson in the Nordic stuff and the Christian monks here in Ireland messed it up, that there's still there's a solid comparative nature to them. This is out of my great love for Joseph Campbell, actually. Joseph Campbell taught me how to understand mythology. And and Carl Jung too as well, and and even Christianity to a certain extent. I mean, it was his investigation of the Synoptic Gospels that really got me realizing that Christianity was completely dangerous. Well, that's another story. But anyway,
did you ever read Jung's? I'm sure you did, the story of his Mithras experience, where he'd read the Mithras liturgy, I think it's called. It's like an Egyptian papyrus. And then he had a patient, but I guess he had the patient first, and the patient was saying he saw this and he saw this and he saw this, and then later on he read the Mithras papyrus, and everything that the patient had said was in the papyrus.
Yeah, incredible, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's just amazing stuff. Well, yeah. So that was the basic thing. So now, when I say I venerate these gods, I don't actually believe. Now, I know there are people or pagans who do, but I don't actually believe they exist as actual beings and entities. I see, as far as I'm concerned, I see them as, you know, for, uh, ways of encapsulating forces of nature and the psychology,
Right.
ultimately, and the human condition, right? So
Right.
therefore, at times, now again, if you go back to chaos magic and stuff, you could actually replace these things with superheroes. There's absolutely, I mean, I was actually trying to promote the idea of a chaos paganism there for a few years, that you could just as easily use Spider-Man as much as you could use Cocoon.
Oh my God, that would be so lame.
It was something like that. I mean,
Yeah.
a character in from popular culture that's in a
Yeah.
kind of like a superhero void, and
Yeah.
that could be used, in lots of ways. I mean, I think the Lovecraftian mythos has a well, it's actually I'm not the forceful to acknowledge that, but that absolutely has a tremendous potential for developing into an American paganism. And like if they wanted to, the same way that kind of, although Lovecraft didn't intend it, in the same way that, excuse me,
You've
in
got
the
the
same,
COVID.
the same way that Tolkien devised an English mythology through his Middle Earth cycle.
Yeah.
So you can venerate. What you're doing is you're calling. It's magic. You're calling upon these forces of these archetypes and incorporating them into your own spiritual quantum nature, whatever you want to call it, and
Yeah.
from that transcending it. About 10 years ago, I would just go walking with my lady, and we'd go into the mountains, and we started to imagine it was scenes from Middle Earth, and we'd be we're walking through Bree, we're walking through Valinor, we're walking through all these places, and it actually had a magical effect upon the landscape after a while. We started to see things like stags and deers that you wouldn't normally see.
Right.
Somebody had actually purchased peacocks in one of the front gardens, and the front garden was full of peacocks with their feathers all displayed. It suddenly started turning into its own way a kind of a Middle Earth, only because we had played an almost like childlike game of we're walking through here, we're walking through there, we're walking through Fangorn and this kind of thing, and it came to pass. So we were we were bringing forward the archetypes of Tolkien's Middle Earth cycle within ourselves, and through the effect of the quantum expression, whatever you want to call it, it manifested itself into a resolution in reality.
Yeah, I do believe that things like that can happen. See, I agree with you. I'm not sure I would describe them just as forces in nature. That is an apt description, but I almost see them as just forces, indescribable, um, possibly outside or beyond nature. But I agree with you that it doesn't so much matter precisely what you call them. That's why I go by what resonates with me, and I suppose you do the same.
Yeah,
But I mean, it does.
yeah.
No, I was going to say it does make sense that one should try to use one's historic ethnic uh, gods. I wish I did, but I always found I just don't know. You pieced it together from all the different Indo-European all the religions that had the same basis. So you just take, if you want a bit of wisdom literature, you just dip into the Havamal or whatever, and you just interpret it in an Irish way. Is that kind of what you do?
Not
Is that
really even like that. I was just basically starting with the Irish thing, but there was a sense of authenticity to it.
But that's one thing that it didn't survive. I don't think I could be wrong. Maybe you have a source. There's not so much of that kind of wisdom literature, is there? That
No,
survived?
it's only preserved in mythology through the
Right.
Christian sources. But that's the same with the Nordic sources. The,
True. Yeah.
the the Nordic sources were all written down by Christians as well. So I mean, these were spoken traditions. They were not literary, and therefore we're living with the concept of eventually some monk or a scribe in the employment of the church, writing them down and editorializing them and spinning them and swinging them towards the Christian mindset.
Yeah. So maybe there's probably just some. I just haven't found enough. I just need to do more specific reading, and I can find more of what I'm looking for. But I was just assumed there was less of it because whenever I tried to look into it, it would. The Celtic stories are fast. They are the craziest almost of the surviving pagan myths I find, and that makes them extra fascinating. And the character of the gods like how do you say Manannán, the sea god? How do you pronounce that in Irish?
Manaman MacLear,
Yeah.
and projects a boat through space and time using his thoughts. They're
Yeah.
very kind of like, wow, they are. They're like
bizarre. They're really bizarre and like cool.
bizarre. But they also they may be a kind of a window into an Atlantean culture, because they almost talk in terms of like magical technologies, which is very unusual. There's no other European mythological cycle that talks in terms of magical technologies like Nuada and the Druid who made him a silver prosthetic.
Silver, yeah.
How what you call it, Balor's eye was accidentally switched on one day in the wrong direction and killed everybody in the Outer Hebrides in Scotland. Like as it was a weapon. And you have Loch Nassoul, which is up in West Sligo, where Balor was supposed to have been slain, and there's a lake there that like vanishes every so often. It falls into the earth. The landscape around it is porous limestone. But a friend of mine who's a fisherman brought me rocks from the bottom of that lake, and they're all burnt. It's melted like lava. So there probably is something to it. So if you want, I think like one of the great things about if there is, well, I actually believe there was some kind of Atlantean culture. It was a civilization before what we told civilization was. And I think there's a hell of a lot of truth to the Plato's Atlantean myth. And I think the Irish mythological cycle kind of validates that. It is crazy, but it seems highly technological at times. It's fascinating, actually.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. No, you're absolutely right. But it's like one of those things like you just read a couple of lines of, and you have to like think about it, and it's like, did I just read that? Like,
yeah,
and it really resonates. It's impactful, but like just in the most odd way. Like it's unlike all the other myths.
Very poetic manner as well. Like the passage where Cuchulain's chariots are charging towards the men of Connacht, and the wheels of the chariots are cutting the roots of the deepest tree. I mean, that's like a very poetic language, a metaphor for like killing the root, killing the past. And there's even a thing where there's even in the Ulster cycle it talks about Cuchulainn experience. Some of the more recent translations that have been done, experiencing what they call a warp spasm, where he bring himself into a kind of a shamanic rage, where his actual body would shapeshift and transform him through space and time. I mean, this is unbelievable stuff. It's almost like the Christians were writing this stuff down. Like, for instance, right, suppose you worked for Apollo, right? And you went to some remote island in the South Pacific where they never heard of even electricity, and you tried to explain to them, we built rockets and how they worked and stuff like that. This is probably
your phone or something. Yeah.
It's probably how they would write them down. You'd have to write them down in ways that they could rationalize them or kind of understand them. That's why I think a lot of the Irish mythology, especially like the Lady Gregory, had some very interesting stuff regarding it. The whole story there's no Irish foundation myth. There's no creation myth in the Irish mythology. But there is a very interesting story that's actually very Lovecraftian about a sea monster that came up onto land at the Boyne Valley, and its body was actually dissected into different pieces, and that eventually became the Dagda and the Boan goddess. So it's it's like, what the hell? Where did that come from?
There's so much in the Boyne Valley is really one of there's a lot there, isn't there? That's really like. Like the holiest part of the country? I don't know. I always hear about stuff.
It would be if it wasn't a Disneyland park. But I mean, there are places around the country like Rathcrogan in Roscommon, Cruachan, which is the center of like the Kingdom of Connacht in the Bronze Age, and that place just oozes an atmosphere and an energy. There's other places like Nimsfield and up around Cong. There's all kinds of the whole country, like down around Lockport and Limerick, and of course like Ulster. I mean, I find when I'm crossing over into Ulster, I feel the power of the Macha goddess, the Morrigan, really strongly and powerfully around like the hills of Ulster, especially when I visit places like Braymore and stuff like that up in the mountains. There's something. Ulster has a tremendous magical charge about it, and harkens back to ancient times. Ironically, considering it's supposed to be British and conquered, but it really has held on to something very powerful.
Yeah. And so, do you find you were saying the state of Irish paganism is pretty set, like Wiccan sort of, just silly people. But have you sort of begun creating a rival group of any kind, or like, do you find there's more people doing it better?
Yeah, I don't care enough to do that. It's really just, I'm only doing it for myself. I don't want to create a church or a group or anything like that. I'm not interested.
Yeah, but if you go out seeking, like you can find that, is there more people kind of?
Oh yeah,
it's getting popular.
Yeah, but it's actually, the hostility is strong too as well. There's a certain element of kind of Orthodox Christians taking root in this country among younger people who kind of like not very well read or educated. They've been taken over by, they've been actually captured by things like not Puritans, the Pentecostals and stuff like that, and online Presbyterian churches, in America. So there's a little bit of that going on, and then you get your fundamentalist Catholics, but there isn't many of them really. I mean, I'm friends with lots of people who I'd say were probably Orthodox Catholics. Well, by Orthodox Catholics, I mean that they're not. Well, I'd say folk Catholic would be a better term. I actually quite like the folk Catholic idea. That's like, you can venerate the rituals and the rites and the ceremonies, and basically what you like about Jesus Christ, except the time that he said that Gentiles were dogs. You're not supposed to mention that. But and you can do it as a folk Catholic. I think that's pretty healthy outside the actual framework of like ecclesiasticalism and the Catholic Church and the Vatican and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, no, I've never had a problem ever, not once. People are very polite. They listen. They want to talk about like magic and stuff like that. They're very fascinated. I mean, I've never had anyone ever come up to me and say, "God, that's the biggest lot of crazy shit I ever heard." They'd actually say, "Geez, that's really interesting." It's how you talk to people. I mean, there's a power in language and a power in the vernacular that that has been lost in so many ways. And
well, you're a master of it, obviously. I mean, you've definitely mastered it. I mean, this is why I think you should pass the skill on somehow. One thing you should have students for is how to talk magic.
Yeah, I've had to work. I've had to work. It's not something that I've had to deprogram my education that I got growing up. But but I think there's a great power in that. There's a tremendous power in that.
You've had a lot of influence. You've been around for a while. I always see you, and I always see people talking about you. Even people like from totally different, attitudes and approaches and things. Just, have you seen this guy?
Well, I think the thing, like, I get a lot of. One of the reasons I get left alone, like I say, I was like quite an anti voice against the whole lockdown and the whole last 2 years. Now, compared to people like what John Waters and Dave Cullen and others I got off real easy. And I think the reason why I got off real easy, like the mainstream media never went after me. I think the Irish Times one time called me a conspiracy theorist, and I said thank you. But that was like in general, and it was even then it was harmless. They were almost like begrudgingly like saying I was entertaining and interesting, but they didn't want to give away too much. But I think that gives you tremendous protection. It's like I'm not political. I absolutely despise politics to the core of my being. I don't have a political belief. As I said, I'm an anarchist. If anything, if you put a political tag on it, maybe traditional libertarianism, but not even that. And I don't have a mandate. I'm not pushing Catholicism. I'm not pushing, return to Jesus. I don't want Holy Catholic Ireland back. I don't want any of that stuff. And
so you confused them. You confused them, so they couldn't pigeonhole you. They didn't know what to do with you.
They can't put a finger on me. They just can't. Because it's like the song by what was his name? Kid Rock, I think it was. You ain't met a motherfucker like me. I think there's a lot of that kind of thing going on.
Yeah. So you never lost any of your social media or anything. And what about, you probably got shadow banned or something?
I lost Twitter, and it was funny. I lost Twitter for being anti-Irish. Because I wait to hear this one. It was pretty funny. There was some reality show star, Love Island, or one of those things. Some Irish guy that was on it had arrived back after like being like the semi-finalist or something, and he arrived in Dublin airport, and there was thousands of people to meet him like he was like a some kind of like great sports star, like it was Ronaldo or somebody who won the Nobel Prize. And I just was laughing at this, and I said, like, there's the proof the famine didn't kill enough of us.
Oh, that is harsh, but that's funny, yeah.
I got a life on Twitter for that.
Oh, that was brazen, but I mean, it's not exactly topically. It's not like trendy PC. It's very old. It's old.
Yeah, it was a satirical comment.
I know.
The people like we're talking about, those people that don't have an internal depth to them, that would be the kind of people who be moderators on Twitter and Facebook and so on.
Oh, yeah, they're the worst. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I know, and I've been badly shadow banned for ages on those things. It's almost worse to be shadow banned because you kind of keep on chugging along. You're like, I still have these 70,000 followers, but like it never grows and nothing ever, and you just kind of, it is there. You can use it a little bit, but
YouTube does tarnish my followers. I do see like people are constantly telling me they've been unsubscribed without having done it themselves.
I'm sure, yeah.
A lot of that goes on. I mean, probably my 3 YouTube channels I'm probably closing in on 100,000 subscribers. But I know it's much more than that. It should be much more than that.
Actually, I don't think your videos even show up for me as like I follow you. I don't think they even show up as the the suggested or even under subscriptions. I don't think.
Yeah, I'm not bothered because people can find me now anyway. But it's like if anyone's starting out on YouTube now and they have a kind of an interesting opinion, I feel sorry for them because they won't have any chance.
Well, have you got an Odyssey where Odyssey backups? It does a double of whatever you got on your YouTube.
Yeah. Well, one of the channels I can back up automatically, which is handy. And also, a lot of people who follow me anyway will just grab the video instantaneously as it's streaming and put it onto their Odyssey channel just in case. So it's like as long as we have an alternative, we still have a reason to do it.
Well, that's great, and you're still there, and I'm sure you'll always be there. And like I said, if you're not out there appearing surprisingly where no one ever expects it, you're still there somewhere in their minds. Giving them weird ideas. And,
absolutely. From weird fiction to weird reality. Yeah.
Well, you've got a great knowledge, a great depth. I'd love to pick your brain again somehow, but like I have specific questions about your technique with the way you speak and everything, and the magic speak or whatever you call it. That is really interesting, and that is extremely unique to you. So that's your great gift, I guess. But I think I've picked your brain enough this time anyway. So thanks for doing that, Thomas. And
let me know when this program is up, and I'll share it around. That was very interesting. I think that you asked questions that how many people haven't asked me in a while or even at all. So I had a feeling you were going to challenge me, and that's good. I'm glad. I enjoyed this.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it was good. Very good. And hopefully we can do it again.
Yep.
I'll shut it down for now, and we'll talk to you later.
Okay. See you.